Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scary Stories We Tell. I am one of your hosts, Chris, and I'm joined by my two other hosts on these SurrealTube episodes. You have heard her here before, and you're hearing her again. One of the hosts of this show, Emma.
It's me. Hello, I am here.
And one of the other hosts of this SurrealTube journey through the magical, wild world of the internet and the things that people put on the internet for other people to watch. He makes things sometimes that go on the internet. Artist, Dustin.
Hi, I'm just here for the rusty spoons.
Gross, dude. So if you have been joining us up until this point, you know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about some more episodes of the internet sensation, Salad Fingers. But before we get started, as always, if you are not familiar with this, go back to the beginning. But if you're dead set on being here and you don't want to start from the beginning, Emma, tell the audience once again a little bit about what Salad Fingers is.
Salad Fingers is hard to describe in terms of coming in midway through. There's definitely a lot of nuance that comes with coming into a series like this at this point. But basically, we are following a very odd story with very little context of a lanky green man with some really long, gross fingers, and him interacting with a post-apocalyptic, potentially world, very dystopian type setting, and his own delusions, his own mental health issues, potentially. And so each episode sort of goes into its own little theme. And I'm waiting to see when exactly it starts culminating into, because it's been a while since I've even watched this, culminating into more of a cohesive narrative, which I think around this point might be it.
They don't have much time left. There's literally 4 more episodes, including this one.
I think this is where that shift happens. So we've already seen a shift in the animation style.
Right.
These episodes are much, much more recent. The first few that were put up online were from like way over like a decade ago. They took Newgrounds by storm.
Which, if you listen to the first episode in this SurrealTube series, you know how not a thing Newgrounds is now. So
it's still out there.
It's still out there, but it is crazy to me that we're closing in on the end of this series, and the last episode came out in 2022, which is last year. To me, that's actually fucking bonkers.
It's been a long time in the making, and you can definitely see how it's starting, like how it started with just like weird creepy for weird creepy's sake. It didn't really set up too much for us other than just introducing us to this world and like kind of ending it there with the intention of making us uncomfortable. And now like there is a level of intrigue. I feel like the first couple episodes lacked that narrative intrigue. It just had that like general unhinged creepiness factor that we could, you know, that we're so nostalgic for from a time long past. But now it's really starting to come into its own in terms of having a narrative structure, and giving you something a lot more to try to theorize on. So I'm curious to see with this episode what you guys think in terms of where the story might be going.
I'm still waiting for the narrative.
I think it's
like
it's this one. Like I said,
Okay.
It's been a while, but I think it's this one.
Okay. I am very interested to see what that is. So, again, I just, there was so much of it in Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, both, subtext and like out front. So this has been a lot of subtext. So it hasn't been out front as much as I was expecting. So
do you have any
maybe we'll be seeing
thoughts, feelings, Dustin, before we hop in?
Well, yeah, I'm also kind of waiting for that moment where like things just all start coming together. and you've got me hyped up with this episode.
All right, then I think we should
The hype train is leaving the station, folks.
all forward to salad fingers.
All aboard, indeed. So we're going to be watching the 9th episode of Salad Fingers. This episode is titled Letter. It was posted on YouTube 9 years ago. It has 5.1 million views. Here we go. Well, what I don't know is we see Salad Fingers in this episode, two different states. One where he looks like he's dead, and then the other one where he looks perfectly fine. I mean, there's that scene where he goes like, he's writing the letter with his finger. He's like, I can't make the war, or whatever. He says something to that effect, right? Like, is that taking place in the present? Is that taking place in the past? Does it matter? I guess ultimately, like, I don't know if it matters. I guess I'm still having a hard time sussing out where this is going, if it's going anywhere, because now we're at soon to be episode 10, and I would contend it's in rather dire straits now if it's introducing mythology, because there's 2 episodes left past this one. I'm still searching for a point, and this episode for me felt like the first one where I'm like, is this is maybe just a little meandering.
I could see that. I think that's fair.
Right? And like, I don't want to say that, but also it's like, the thing I should have said before we watched the episode is my concern is whether or not it will be able to fill up 9 minutes. And then the next episode is fucking 10 minutes. And then the one past that is 15. So I'm just concerned that there's not enough there in the state that the show is in now to necessitate these longer runtimes. And watching this episode it feels a little bit like validation, because by the end of this episode, I have no idea what's going on. It seems intentionally vague this time around, or intentionally just strange, which it's kind of been this whole time, but now it feels like they really cranked it up.
I would agree. I definitely think in terms of visual symbolism, it's really difficult to suss out exactly what is happening. But I think in the context of the previous episode, which I recall sort of landing on the idea of abuse,
Right.
primarily like the radio representing a parental figure, yelling at you to clean the house and judging you. And then he goes to his cupboard to cry, which I think when you label it as, familial abuse, I think despite how strange the symbols are, it makes some sense. And I think it's also fair to say that either this is representing current abuse, or it was meant to be him reliving that trauma while he is alone, and personifying the things around him to cope with said trauma. However, I think
Interesting.
Yeah. I think this episode kind of dives a little deeper into, it could either be him role-playing what his family was like growing up, where he takes on the role of what his parents might have been for him.
Interesting.
Or it could be manifesting this desire that he wishes that he could have had a family after all of that abuse that he endured in his childhood. I mean, family is probably the biggest theme in this episode, and I think coupled with abuse from the previous episode, I think that makes a lot of sense. Having the tree in the beginning, which pretty sure that was meant to be a dream sequence.
I assume so.
Because he seemed to have woken up after being like squeezed by the branch.
Right.
And it's
So maybe it's not a chronological thing. It's like a states of being thing then.
yeah. I think it's supposed to be a look into his subconscious in a way, and
Right.
and how we process trauma. But I would say that the tree in the beginning represents neglect. So with the context of that being like the opening for the episode, does that sort of help you put some thoughts into words, Chris?
Yeah, but I mean, again, it honestly just comes back to this idea of like, how is Salad Fingers and Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared talking about the same thing, but one is doing it so much more entertaining, seamlessly, because that's kind of what Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared's talking about, right? Like,
Gotta stop comparing the two. It's apples
I
and
can't
oranges,
help
my
it.
guy.
That's not. It's all on the internet. It's not apples and oranges when you could be watching this or Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Hey, we're doing both.
But you know what I mean. You know what I
don't think
mean.
it's fair to compare them, though. I think they're different mediums. I think they're different stories, and I think they're trying to evoke completely different feelings. I don't think it's fair to compare. You're being very harsh.
I think it's fair to compare anything to anything else if it's art.
I think it is doing what it's intending to do effectively, personally.
I mean, I agree with that. I just don't think it's resonating with
That's
me
fair.
the way Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. And that's more what I'm getting at. It's again like I 100% can remove myself and my feelings from things and be objective. And this is objectively interesting. I'm not sure it's objectively as successful as Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is. I mean, there were parts of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared that were not great either, that were meandering. And like that the family episode of that show was not as good as most everything else we had seen. So I'm not going to say it's surprising. I just don't think it resonated with me as much. And I'm not surprised now because, I don't know, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, I resonated with it immediately.
I definitely think that they both play on a different form of nostalgia. And so I think Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared really capitalizes on the nostalgia of, early development programming, PBS type stuff, public access television. It really pulls from that part of a lot of our shared childhoods to an extent. Whereas this is doing something completely different. And the nostalgia that it's pulling from is specifically the creepiness of the internet at this time, the weird, dark, the creepypastas, the all of like the weird Reddit stories, and the Squidward suicide. I'm sure you've heard of that one, Chris. No? Oh my god. There's a lot of like very edgy content from that time period. And
Right.
So this taps into that. I mean, the originals were made around that time. And then he continued this series, which was obviously a callback, and continues to evoke those same feelings, which was just like you stumbled across like a really weird part of the internet. And that's always how it felt. And I think it's trying to evoke that feeling, but now it's telling some kind of a deeper narrative and having some kind of commentary on abuse or trauma or PTSD, some kind of mental issue following around a single character.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I completely agree.
I mean, so it makes sense, if it isn't resonating the same way, because, I mean, we were all indoctrinated with children's programming. We weren't all indoctrinated with creepy, dark corners of the internet. Like, if you weren't actively seeking that out, it took a lot to stumble across it, unless if somebody else showed it to you. You had to actively be seeking out this stuff. Maybe it came up in your recommended, but you still had to click it. Like,
right. Right.
If you didn't hear about it, you didn't know about it. Like, a lot of this stuff will very easily fly under the radar. but everybody knows Sesame Street, you know? So I think, like I said, comparing the two nostalgias in terms of like where it resonates of these two different series, I think that's where it really, divides, I suppose. It's pulling from two very different sources.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. I think, like you said, it's just, I think the approachability with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is more there than it is with this. I think that the intent of this is to kind of keep you at an arm's length. I think Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is meant to bring you in, but also like as you get closer, you realize that like maybe that picture isn't what it actually looks like. Like this feels like it's very much keeping you at an arm's length.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like it's intentional.
It's cryptic.
Right. Almost to the point of non-existence.
That's fair.
I mean, again, like I'm not trying to drag this, but more just speak to the idea of like, if they're using the show to tackle serious topics, then they're doing a really good job, I think, of being vague enough where things can mean multiple things. But in terms of like traditional storytelling, there is not a traditional narrative.
Definitely not.
It is.
At least not
right.
yet.
So, right. And I think for not a lot of people, but I think for some people that might be an immediate jumping off point before they even
of course.
get a minute in. And I think that, again, like I said, that's what in my mind is like keeping you at an arm's length. That's,
I think what's really fascinating about this show specifically is that each episode is in it of itself its own character study, and you can view it individually as such. It does lack the overarching narrative, but it has self-contained narratives. And I don't remember past this point if it starts to connect a little bit more. I will tell you now, you will have a ton of answers at the end, and you will probably never know what a ton of questions at the end. You will never know what those answers are. So it's
I'm prepared for that mentally.
Speculation, and I think it was meant to do so. David, when creating this, I think definitely wanted people to discuss it and put their own spins on what they think the meaning would be. Whereas I think like with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, it feels more like a mystery where they're giving you all the puzzle pieces and like it's up to the community to like put it together, and there is a definitive answer eventually. And that's what I think Don't Hug Me is building up towards.
Right.
I don't think that this has a definitive answer. If anything, it has a nebulous answer.
Which I'm perfectly fine with, frankly. So I'm okay with that. I don't need them to answer everything, thankfully. But I understand the trepidation of anyone getting involved watching something like this where they watch it and at the end they're just like, what the fuck was all this? Like, what the fuck was any of this? And like, I could see that more with this than I could with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like this is such a uniquely specific thing that was always going to be the case. So again, I appreciate that you wanted to watch this, because I never would have watched this on.
I mean, that's what
no
what this
fucking
series
way
comes down to, is I am culturing you. I am internet culturing you.
Like in a fucking petri dish. Culturing you.
Exactly.
Dustin, any thoughts before we continue on to the next episode?
I'm just kind of stuck on what the hell came out of his stomach.
That's a good question. It was a baby, I think.
Well, it was a mass. It was something. So, while you guys are talking...
Do you think...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think it's meant to represent an abortion or a stillbirth?
I don't know. Maybe?
Maybe. A miscarriage?
I mean, I don't know what that would say about Salad Fingers, so...
I think Salad Fingers is definitely confirmed to be a male, and I think at this point, it's just that he vacillates between roles as he's reliving trauma.
Okay.
Which, oh no, Dustin, you.
Well, I was just gonna say I was thinking more literal with it. I was just trying to think of all the weird things Salad Fingers has been eating throughout the episodes. Because,
That's a good point.
and here we are, all the weird crap he's been eating, he's bursting out of it because he hasn't exactly been a picture of health.
No,
I wouldn't
child. We think
off screen.
That's good.
Maybe. I mean,
he does refer to that thing that popped out of him as his child.
maybe symbolically it is meant to represent some kind of either it is supposed to be like a baby via C-section or an abortion or a stillbirth. I mean, obviously it bursting out of his stomach to me represents some sort of, C-section being performed. But in terms of like if something is actually, it's so hard to say like what is actually happening and what isn't.
Right.
And I think that's also where, Chris, you're probably struggling the most. I mean, it's where everybody is struggling, is discerning what's meant to be reality in this realm. But
well, I'm just struggling to figure out if it matters. Is more my issue.
Fair.
Because like, why are you doing this? What scope in regards to the narrative does this matter? That there's like dream sequences and stuff. Because again, like I'm cool with dream sequences and out of step storytelling and chronologically disjointed storytelling, but it needs to be serving some purpose. And it feels like, again, like the purpose, David Firth knows the purpose, if there is one. Do you know what I mean? Like,
but I do think
that's
I do think it's a really interesting point, Dustin, that like saying like if what had happened to his stomach, if that was an actual thing that has happened in his reality and not a dream sequence, not a hallucination, not a representation, but an actual thing, it would make sense that it's from all the shit he's been eating and touching. It makes a lot of sense. I honestly, that is not something that I've thought of before, because so much of this, as I said, is so nebulous and speculative that I often forget to remind myself what could and could not be reality, and I sort of just take everything at face value and think everything at this point is a hallucination, which I don't think is true, but it's the easier way to think about it.
Well, and again, to what end, right? Like,
yeah, at the end he's cleaning the window with it and then eating the sandwich. It was strange. All things strange, what I'm saying, but
I was like,
I mean, I think a really interesting part towards the end of that episode, though, was the fact that he was intending on giving this child, this baby, to an aunt, to potentially this, baby's aunt, approaches a figure in the wasteland who, like every other potentially living creature in this story, none of them speak, except for I think that there was one little girl in an episode earlier on that did speak, but everybody else sort of just has sounds, mumbles or screeches. But he approaches this person, ? Intending initially to give over the child, and then decides not to. And I think that's a really interesting point. Why wouldn't he? And so what might that represent? And I think, then using this quote unquote baby growth thing that was ripped from his stomach to then wash a window. And like, I think that probably has a deeper meaning. Could be abuse, could be representing forcing, a child to do those types of things and reliving that. There are a lot of ways to interpret it, but I do think it if we were to point out like one really interesting thing is, why wouldn't he want to give away the child after everything, saying that he couldn't take care of it, saying that he's in poor health, knowing that's apparently that somebody else could have taken the child in, and it chose not to.
Flip the switch like that into what you're saying. It's like, rather than get rid of saying that he thinks it's a child, rather than get rid of it, put it to use it for something, make it work for it in some capacity.
Interesting.
How could it be useful?
I feel like there is a point.
There has to
here,
be.
right? It all feels too intentional to not be. Like, again, like the symbolism is kind of there. Like,
You have to really
out the windows completely.
Yeah, and like, what could that represent? Like, being blinding yourself to something. Like,
yeah,
every detail, I feel like you could comb through each episode with a fine-tooth comb and like write them out, and like maybe once it's in list form, you know, separating it all out from like all the weirdness that just like hypnotizes you the whole time, makes it hard to, you know, think further past what you're seeing. If you were to take all of those symbols and just write them on paper and define what they could mean, I think we'd probably get closer to an answer.
well, there's a lot of children. There's a lot of finger puppets.
Yes.
I mean, that's a reoccurring theme. So, yeah, I'm excited. I mean, as excited as I can be to watch the next episode, which is titled Birthday. Cool. It was just my birthday, so Salad Fingers is celebrating a birthday. It's Hubert Cumberdale's birthday, but Milford Cubicle isn't feeling so well. This episode was posted a while ago. That's not right, is it? Can't be right. It says March of last year.
Could be a re-upload. The uptick in animation quality has made David far too powerful.
I have like 6 salad fingers running around, so yeah, it's a little much. I think, again, ultimately, when you watch something like this, again, like, you know, try as you may, try as you might, Emma, I'm still failing to see the narrative. I'm still failing.
All right. I think it's...
But it's not I'm not saying that's your fault. I'm saying it's just like, the thing with this is, I'm actually surprised we're on the 10th episode that this lasted as long as it did, with, in my opinion, doing as little as it really has, of like saying anything, really.
That's fair.
Which is in and of itself impressive. Like, that is a impressive feat, is to be able to just be genuinely, quote, entertaining, unquote, and not necessarily be trying to, you know, change people's mindset about climate change or familial trauma.
So, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What upset you about the teeth so much?
That was so fucking gross.
Was it really that gross?
It really was. It was. Those teeth going back and forth while he's cranking is just gross. Teeth stuff grosses.
See, I that's what I wanted to get to the bottom of. Did you have like a weird issue with weird teeth stuff?
Did I have a weird issue with teeth stuff? When I was 4 or 5 years old, you know at the playground, above the slide, there's like that metal bar you swing on. I definitely didn't face plant into that by accident and smash out my 4 front teeth as like a 5-year-old.
Oh my God.
And have
us back to childhood. We are unpacking childhood trauma.
And I had the shards jammed into my gums to the point where they had to give me 13 shots in my mouth to then extricate the teeth shards from my face.
I learned something new about you today.
Yeah, I wore childhood dentures.
Oh my God.
Yeah, because I was missing my 4 front teeth. So, and thankfully they were baby teeth, not adult teeth. But yeah, I maybe have some teeth stuff
I can see why.
Yeah, it grosses me out. And like I grind my teeth at night. I have to wear like a little thing in my mouth when I go to bed. So I don't know, teeth. Me and teeth, that's my thing. Like my wife's thing is stuff in the eyes. Like my stuff is like teeth stuff.
Wow. I don't know if I have a specific body part that I associate with discomfort.
That's fair.
Dustin, what about you?
By you, Dustin.
Is that body discomfort?
Just like something of a specific body part, like when something does something weird with it. Some freak you out.
No, this is weird, but teeth stuff doesn't bother me. In fact, I love going to the dentist. But
drill me harder, daddy, is not something Dustin says unironically.
So if you look to the top of your foot, and like you can see the veins.
Wait, let me get the visual.
Yep.
All right, looking.
If anyone were to press on those veins on the top of my foot, I'd freak out.
Really?
Yep.
That's random. Huh. That's even more random than teeth stuff. That is oddly specific.
But this is important. Can we trace it back to childhood?
I have no idea. I just
Is it because they're really prominent? Doesn't matter if it's somebody else's foot?
No, it's just my foot.
Just your foot.
Huh. So is it just that part of your foot, or is it your whole foot that you don't like being touched? I'm just asking.
No, I don't mind my foot being touched. It's
just those veins.
Just for when we're in the sensory deprivation tank.
Together.
Dustin, do you like having your feet touched? No, stay on that side of the tank from me.
Rub. And she knows this about me. And sometimes she'll do it to where she thinks she's funny, but she'll like run her thumbs or something across them, and I'll just be like, oh.
And it takes everything in Dustin's power to not accidentally.
I was going to say, like, that's a really fast way to get, like, kicked in the face.
Literally, your teeth go flying through the air after you're accidentally punted in the face.
And it all comes back to teeth.
Right? Salad fingers.
All right.
I don't know. I don't know what to make of what happened in that episode, but by the end of it, there was a table of salad fingers.
There was. I think before we get to that, what did you think about the horses?
Okay, I don't know what was going on here, folks, but there was a little monster that killed a horse or dug its way into a horse, and it was Dr. Monster. And it was Puppet Dr. Monster. This is like Puppy Baby Monkey now. I mean, we're at the point with this show where, like, all bets are off in terms of what we can expect to be happening.
Yeah.
And so at this point, like, a horse being ripped apart by a little creature with hooks for hands, par for the course, I feel like, at this point.
Nothing in the show will surprise me.
Right.
I don't even remember this episode. I remember the salad fingers, table salad fingers at the end. I did not remember the horses, and yet it did not shake me.
I mean, it was pretty gnarly, but I mean, again, like, I've seen worse things than just like a horror movie.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's just animation.
Right. It is gnarly, though, and
yeah.
it's gross. And again, this animation style, there is a level of just ickiness to this animation style anyways. I mean, that's an intent of David Firth to make it kind of look grimy and gross.
He does that really
and that's
well.
Received. Right. It's received by me as an audience member, but yeah, no, just so much is gross stuff in this show.
But I'm wondering
stuff.
what the horses represented. I would say that, like, the moment it hit, like, the scene with the doctor, that's like, that has to be a point of hallucination. That, like, and everything onward from that point to me is either a dream sequence or just straight up visual hallucinations after visual hallucinations. Like, I can't imagine anything that happened after he first found the doctor puppet happening in his actual reality.
Right. I think it has to be like a dream or something, right? It seems too ethereal to be real.
Oddly enough for this show, yes.
Right. I mean, I feel like this show telegraphs when it's doing the dream sequence stuff pretty well. I think it nails it for the most part. You know, I don't think it leans on the laziest of things where it's like, is it a dream or not? Mm-hmm. When it's a dream, it's a dream. It's pretty obvious it's a dream. It's not like, and Salad Fingers wakes up and it's actually just Willem Dafoe. Like, it's not that. Like, it's not going to be that. Okay. If that was the ending, I'd be like, that is without a doubt the wildest shit I've seen all year.
I really want to know what the horses represent. Obviously, he has a horse figurine that he named Horace, and then
which, if you say it really fast, sounds like horse.
Which makes me wonder if he knew somebody named Horace. He assigned that to this figurine of a horse because of that connection. But regardless, when he returns to his house, it is quite literally filled with horses.
Right.
Alive ones stuffed in the cupboard and in the drawer. And I think that's what really solidified it for me as a dream sequence or hallucination. Like,
okay,
for horses to be stuffed into a drawer, I think like that's right. Really like where we kind of gotta draw the line.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna draw the line anywhere, why not there?
Why not at the horses being stuffed into a drawer?
Right.
I mean, we didn't see how they got there, and I don't think other horses would be able to stuff a horse into a drawer.
And that's a dream sequence, right?
I would say so. I would say all of the living horses and all of the ones in the cupboards and in the drawers, I think all of that has to be a hallucination. But my question is, why? What would horses represent?
If anything, right?
I'm gonna Google right now.
What doth a horse representeth?
I want to know what it represents in a dream.
A horse? Freedom of your spirit. Freedom to run and be wild. Meat. I have had horse meat before. It's not bad. I think we as Americans are a little touchy on the kinds of things that we are allowing to eat because they breed horses in this country and they send them overseas to eat them. So it's not like horses aren't being bred in this country to be eaten. They're just not being eaten here.
So for the most part, what I'm getting from my Googling is that they represent strength and freedom. And if that's the case, if it is freedom, I think that would make probably the most sense. Is it supposed to be a reminder that he is not free?
Okay.
You know, from whatever is plaguing his mind. I mean, that is a reach, in my own opinion. I'm making a reach, but it seems like a very odd symbol to fixate on so harshly. Like, I feel like
for the first time too.
Like, this is, I mean, like we've talked about rust and we've talked about nails and drawing blood and hair and all of that. But like, this is the first time that like we have seen just a shitload of something living that should not be there, and they are everywhere, just out of nowhere, just manifesting as if they had always been there. And it just, why horses? I guess in that case it could have been anything, but I feel like there has to be a deeper meaning. I feel like there has to be. There's got to be a deeper meaning. So
choose them all out, and then just chooses to hang out with himself.
He rejects freedom. Maybe he rejects freedom and chooses to then go sit at the table with his quote-unquote platoon, therefore staying in his past? Question mark.
And they just all look like him.
Right. And
And they're not letting go of the past. Right?
That's what I would assume. And so it seems like a literal attempt for him to reject freeing his own mind in favor of living in the past. And I think the fact that they're all of the versions of himself, you know, if this is meant to represent his platoon in the Great War that they keep mentioning, you know, why are they all like unhinged and more so than usual than what we expect, but, you know, eating brains and looking more grotesque than usual and smashing an eyeball consistently. And I think it's just supposed to be a representation of, yes, this is his platoon, but it is not a good thing. Him staying in the past is quite clearly not good for him. I think if anything, that's probably, at least for me, I think that's all it represents. I don't know. Dustin, what do you think?
Well, I noticed also that all the other Salad figures at the table, some of them had like holes in their head, like the brains came from them.
They're eating parts of themselves.
And there was an earlier episode where he was chewing on his own head.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do remember that.
Callback.
Huh. Self-harm.
Self-cannibalism. Auto-cannibalism.
Eating your brain.
Or whatever that might be considered. Metaphorically.
Self-sabotage, question mark?
I mean, again, I feel like that's...
Is this the closest we've gotten?
I mean, I think again, I think in a lot of ways, for me, this is just one of those things where it's like, ultimately, at the end of the day, like, have they given us enough to really have a concrete answer?
Not yet. I think, if anything, there's like a single thing that we know for sure, and that is that whoever this character is served in a war. And now whatever he is living in is the aftermath of said war. And I think that is the only truth that we can rely on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And everything else is symbolism past that point.
The war trella.
Which would make the most sense to me. I mean, they bring up the war in almost every single episode in one way or another. And I think like this is the first time that like it was like we really saw how much it matters to him. He was so happy to see that table of himself that represented his platoon. He was so grateful to see them again. Like, those were his glory days.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, again, the whole, like, war aspect of this and what does that mean to the character? I mean, like you said, I mean, like, it's the one thing we know for certain.
Everything. Yeah.
Maybe the only thing we ever know for certain, frankly. Like, ain't much left at this point.
I think the only other constant is that he is deeply disturbed in some way or another. Yeah. I think that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, they've given us stuff, but I don't think they've given us anything concrete enough to really say, like, oh, well, this is what this means definitively, or that's what this is, and we can verify it. Like, this all is just kind of like, well, this is kind of like this and kind of like this, so we kind of think this. And, like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
you know,
fair.
I think David Firth would probably say very similarly to other creators who make things like this, oh, I don't want to tell you what the meaning is because then it would diminish what you think it means.
Exactly. I think it's supposed to mean something a little bit different to everybody, which is why it's so vague in its symbolism.
Right.
I think David is welcoming speculation. Like, that is a part of the experience. To speculate is part of the experience.
Right.
So, do you want to do one more?
Which I appreciate, by the way. Like, I always want to put that out there. Like, I do appreciate that he is making content that he wants to make unabashedly. Like, you know, and I would think we could say that about Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared as well. Like, even when they changed from YouTube to the show, still making the content that they wanted to make, just like when this went from Newgrounds to YouTube, the the content hasn't changed. It's frankly gotten better, quality-wise.
Agreed.
Dustin, what do you think? Do you want to do one more, or do you want to end it here?
I'm okay for one more.
Okay.
Let's
So
more.
let's do one more, and we're going to bring it to the next episode, the penultimate episode of Salad Fingers. And boy, was posted 4 years ago, and my God, folks, it has a supported by the Patrioids on Patreon, which is just like actually mind-blowing that this show started when I was 14 and it ended when I was 32.
A lot of time in the making.
I feel like this would be great to like revive, and like the last episode ends in like an Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode, and Charlie wakes up and it was all his dream, because he's always like, up in rat poison and stuff.
Burning garbage and inhaling it so that it can go into the air and make stars.
It's just all a big dream he had. I know that's kind of out.
I would be.
Yeah, it's
I would be.
It's literally what I just said would really suck if the show did it.
I would be absolutely livid, and I would not have shared it with you. If that was the case, I might have still shared it with you, but with the caveat of you're going to hate the ending.
Yeah. I have a friend who tried to get me to watch the TV show Merlin, and he said the same thing. This is different. I would watch 12 short episodes of this. I would never watch I would never watch Game of Thrones anymore, like the original show. If because someone's like, oh, it ends really poorly. And it's like, well, why would I even waste any of my time watching it? Like, why would I waste a single minute watching something that has like a really like across the board, everyone's unanimous that it was a bad ending.
That's
like
how
if Salad Fingers woke up in a dream and he was Homer Simpson, I'd be like, wow, this is a fucking piece of shit.
That is how I felt with the Netflix Sabrina series. It is.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I know what ends up happening, and I know that a lot of people were really not happy.
After all of that, after everything awful. Like,
hey, I watched Dexter, and I watched 8 seasons of that show, only for it to shit the bed about as hard as you could shit a bed. So, and Game of Thrones, so, I don't know.
I'm just so pissed because I got Jan into it while I was like halfway through. So I was watching it on my own, and then like he was trying to catch up. And then like I got to the ending and I was like, stop. It's just stop.
We're not watching any more of this.
Oh god.
Yeah, I get it. I'm hopeful that these 2 episodes, this one and then when we come back and finish the last one, will maybe answer questions, give us more questions, who knows, but it just cracks me up that we're sitting and looking at a Patreon advertisement on Salad Fingers, because all of this feels so distant, right? Like, oh, it started in 2004 on Newgrounds, and then here it's like Patreon. And like, I know Patreon ain't that old, because Patreon has only existed since I've started podcasting.
Like 10-ish.
So something like that, if that. So because Patreon existed around the same time as like Kickstarter, so probably like 10-11 years. So it's just funny because like here we are, Salad Fingers is a Patreon product now. So
I will say that at the very least, after all is said and done with this series and we cap it out, Matt Pat at Film Theory, Game Theory did cover it. So at least he got to dive into some at least his personal favorite theories. So that's
I think that has to be obviously the statement that's used is like personal, right? Because I don't.
There is no
David Firth has. Okay, and David Firth has never said anything.
He might have confirmed a few things. I think he might have like commented and confirmed something. I don't remember, but the rest of it has remained unconfirmed as far as I know.
Gotcha.
All right.
Well,
let's do it.
With that out of the way, we'll watch the 11th and penultimate episode of Salad Fingers. It was posted 4 years ago in 2019, 6.3 million views. and it is titled Glass Brother. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the longest episode of Salad Fingers, clocking in at a whopping 15 minutes. So if we were wondering if it could support the narrative before, it's going to be about to put to the test. So here we go.
We have a new Salad Fingers. We are now in Glass Brother timeline.
Yeah, that was wild. I don't. So, yeah, there's like an alternate dimension that you go through a mirror. It was introduced in the 11th episode of a 12-episode show.
Yep.
Right? Like,
I think you are taking it probably more literally than it should be.
I mean, it's literally a mirror that he goes through, though.
I think it's important to remember that this still could all be, this bit could be within his mind as well. This could be...
Oh, sure, of course.
If so, it's a very interesting metaphor for trauma.
Okay. I mean, again, I would be inclined to agree with you that I think more or less everything in this show is about trauma.
I think so.
And how one processes it or deals with it or however you want to perceive, however you handle having trauma happen to you. Like I think part of it is that. I mean, obviously, this episode of Salad Fingers has painted Salad Fingers as a much more sympathetic character than I think any of the other episodes have.
Definitely, for sure.
Well, Flesh Boy will do that to you.
I mean, Flesh Boy's great. I will.
So what does that mean?
Chris, you know I have a soft spot for little Flesh Boys because
true.
In Don't Have Me I'm Scared, we had Stain Edwards, the Forever Boy, who was technically also a little Flesh Boy. Yeah. There's something about that character trope that has appeared obviously in both of these shows. They're just there's a zest for life. Just
in their cute little faces.
And their cute little face. Well, Stain Edwards is adorable objectively.
Yeah, this character is ugly and weird and then is smashed in glass and licked by Salad Fingers.
Glass Brother Salad Fingers.
Yeah. So what do you guys think about that? This whole Glass Brother, Glass Mother thing.
Well, what do you think your Glass Brother would represent?
It's like your shadow self.
That's how I interpret it.
Right. And I'm your friend and you've told me about it, so that's how I'm interpreting it.
I think if we are to... I mean, okay, so towards the beginning, Salad Fingers asks if he could come home. He doesn't want to be alone anymore. He wants to return to Glass Brother and Glass Mother, which again to me seems like rejecting freedom.
Right.
Choosing to stay...
Embracing the abuse.
Choosing to stay trapped within your own mind. Stockholm Syndrome, esque trauma.
Right.
And I, as you said, your shadow self, obviously Glass Brother Salad Fingers seems more confident, seems more sure of himself. Definitely is meaner to the Salad Fingers that we know. He has no patience for Salad Fingers being weak. And I think it's an interesting metaphor for the parts of yourself, the weak part of yourself, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of yourself. And then the part of you that does want to break free, that does want to grow and do better for yourself. And I think Salad Fingers has locked that part of himself away and it is escaped in favor of the weak version of Salad Fingers.
Interesting. So you think that the Glass Brother is the one that we've been seeing this whole time?
I wouldn't say so. I think we've been following normal Salad Fingers the entire time, and he has been hiding Glass Brother and Glass Mother from us.
Okay. I mean, it makes sense. Again, to what end do Glass Brother and Glass Mother matter?
To him, if you want.
Right, to him. But Glass Mother shows up in this episode, and again, I'm not sure what her point is other than being a stereotypical overbearing mother figure, which again, immensely relatable for a lot of people. So I get why they would include something like that in
They still kept a small piece of her in a little case at the end.
Rubbed with his blood.
That is also a really good point, is that he went out of his way to destroy the mirror as much as possible, grind it into a dust, but he kept one small piece and locked it away. And I think that shows that even though he has entered into a more confident version of himself, a version of himself that does want to break free, there is still that part of him that can't let go.
Right. No matter what he does.
Exactly. It's really hard to let go of your past, and makes me wonder what the blood represents. He cuts himself on the glass shard that contains Glass Mother and smears that blood over the piece of glass. And I'm wondering, I mean, my first thought is like, is that like a blood is thicker than water type metaphor?
Mm-hmm. That's it, yeah.
I mean, choosing to keep something that hurts you, choosing to hurt yourself to keep that part of your life intact.
Right. Which in and of itself is toxic.
One way mother can keep hurting it.
And it's the way that she keeps a hold over his life. As much as, again, that he allows her to as well, obviously. Because, again, he clearly has some semblance of free will. He is able to create life from no life. So Salad Fingers is he's an interesting character because there is a level of nuance here that is finally coming through where he is a somewhat sympathetic, possibly completely sympathetic character.
I mean, I think it's important to remember that while being sympathetic, you can still be horrible in your own special way.
Right. Well, again, I mean, keep him at an arm's length, right? Like, you know.
Do I feel bad? Sure. Is it enough for me to want to be his friend? I don't think so.
No, I'm with you on that.
Now, Hubert Cumberdale.
Oh, no. Just no Hubert Cumberdale, nothing. Ugh. Yeah, that little flesh creature man is somehow grosser than most of the things we've seen in this show.
He didn't bother me that much.
You just like those little fleshy creatures that run around on their little legs.
It was the voice. The voice did it for me.
That's fair.
It's just so innocent.
I will say we mentioned it while we were watching it. Man, the show looks good now. Like,
if you imagine episode 1 in comparison to this.
Right. Episode 1 was like literally done in like MS Paint. Yep. This is clearly like animated in the computer because there is a level of like 3-dimensionalness to the character that there has not been up until this point at all. It's very much appreciated. At least I appreciate it.
I think at this point, it's starting to feel like a very well put together fever dream.
Right. As opposed to like this weird thing on the internet you stumbled onto.
Like for me personally, this is the episode I remembered the most. This is the episode I feel is the most compelling out of all of them. As you said, a lot of them felt like meandering. I think, it was a lot of world building and introductions to character all culminating into something like this. And I think that this episode is the most understandable, albeit still confusing in its own way. Obviously, you know, it's hard to discern reality from metaphor, from hallucination. You know, did he actually create a little flesh boy? Who knows?
Right, exactly.
Does he?
And ultimately, does it matter, right? Like, right.
It does. I think that is a good point. I think when it comes to Hubert, I don't think it does matter. I think you could probably take that or leave that. For me personally, I kind of am leaning towards in reality, he is real to an extent. I don't know, because then he references Glass Brother and interacts with Glass Brother.
Right.
And if we're working under the assumption that Glass Brother is a metaphor for your shadow self,
that's what I think.
Then maybe Hubert is supposed to represent a different part of Salad Fingers. The innocent side of Salad Fingers, you know, projecting, you know, the childhood he wish he could have had, maybe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. I mean, there is that point where he looks into the mirror and he says to himself, he calls himself Hubert Cumberdale. So.
Did he?
Again, like, yeah, he like looked into the mirror and said it like straight up. It's like very early. It was like very early on in the episode.
I guess it's like the shot reverse shot that's confusing me, because we reveal later on that, like, in this context, Glass Brother, you know, it can operate separate from the reflection.
Correct.
And so it's basically just the mirror is a stand-in for where he just would have been looking potentially at the finger puppet. That's hard for me to say. It could be both.
I mean, it's no coincidence that later in the episode he is talking to someone in a mirror. That is why it stuck out to me. Like you mentioned, there is a character later in the episode who's literally in the mirror.
It's interesting. I don't know if I've seen a theory that says, like, that Hubert is Salad Fingers, is, you know, that Hubert Cumberdale, this finger puppet, is a stand-in for Salad Fingers, and Salad Fingers has just disassociated from his own identity, which would be really interesting.
Well, that's kind of where I thought this was going and is going, is like, you know, he has these like finger puppets and other people that he's talking to, and I've never been convinced that they're real people. Like, it could just be like figments of his imagination, which he's creating. And again, there's literally him talking into a mirror at one point, thinking he's talking to someone else that also looks like him. So it's just hard to know, you know?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I liked this. I think I'm with you, though. I liked this episode the most.
It's the most compelling. It makes the most sense narratively, but it's also just like the coolest journey out of all of them.
Right. I agree. It tells a story that is infinitely more interesting and I think impactful than any of the other episodes. And it's 15 minutes, but it doesn't feel like.
No, it felt like at most like 10.
Yeah. And it felt like it was better paced than the last episode, which was actually shorter than this one.
Yeah, the last one felt longer than this one, for sure.
I had a moment where I wondered if we were in sort of like weird timeline jump, because the flesh boy is about the same size as the thing that came out of his stomach, and he was eating that black porridge. Yeah, couldn't help but wonder. There's some weird connection with the black porridge and Hubert Cumberdale, or first attempt at, maybe it really was his first attempt at making a little companion.
You mean 2 episodes? Was it 2 in our last episode where it's that little thing that pops out of him?
Yes.
Yeah. 2 episodes ago. Last episode was horses.
Future, huh? After he eats Hubert Cumberdale.
Yeah, again, the chronology of the show is not... I have had a question as to what the chronology of the show is this whole time, because it doesn't seem like there is any, like, rhyme or reason, really. Like, I don't know what takes place after anything else, or if any of this takes place before anything, or again, if any of that even matters.
It reminds me of the theme in Don't Hug Me, where it's like at the end of the episode, everything is put right back to where it was. Like, it's like a reset. Every episode almost feels like a reset. Anything that's happened to him, we move on to the next episode and it no longer is affecting him.
Plays on sitcom logic, right?
Yeah.
Have to come back to the start at the end of every episode.
So in that case, there wouldn't really be a chronological order.
Right.
Each story would just be self-contained. But I want to believe that there has to be some kind of...
Right. Chronology to some of this. I mean, we didn't think that there was a chronology to Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, but there ended up being one. So maybe it's just a matter of, like, there is one, but it doesn't matter, is probably kind of what I feel like it may be.
Unless if literally all of this is taking place in his mind, is just one massive hallucination. Which is not my favorite interpretation.
Right.
But
I don't like any interpretation where he's a hallucination or there's a hallucinatory aspect to it. Like, that just feels like a cop-out.
That's fair. But I think, like, when talking about, like, I think it's important to come to the conclusion of, is this supposed to be like a supernatural-esque world where weird things can actually happen, or is it supposed to just all be metaphors for mental health? Because I think that is probably like the switch for me. Because again, like I said, I think everything with Glass Brother and Glass Mother is an extensive metaphor, obviously, but I also think, like, that is an internal struggle within the realm of the show, not an external struggle.
Okay.
And so how much of this is internal? Is he actually living in a dystopian hellscape? Like, are any of the characters that we have met, are they even real? Like, it really brings into question the reality of this world, because that continuity never really felt truly established, because that line was so blurred from the beginning.
Right.
But in a way, I think that also is something that it does successfully, because it feels more than intentional. Like, if the intention was to confuse the shit out of us, it was done beautifully.
Yeah, well, and again, it always begs the question in my mind. It's like, was it done intentionally to do this, or just they were like, well, if we do this at this point, they will have no idea what to think. Like, I guess that's technically the same thing, but at the same time, it's just the intent behind it. It's if you do it intentionally or if you're just doing it to do it. I feel like at this point, they're like, we have the opportunity to really do something with this narrative, and I think we should. And I think it works. Like, again, they're hitting on the things that they've already talked about, but tying it together in a more satisfying way than they have before. They actually seem like they care about having something in between the moments where Salad Fingers isn't just being weird. There are things going on, like, and that's very apparent in this episode and has been missing in every other episode. But I understand why. The limitations are what they are. Like, this is 2019.
Yeah.
Look at how good this is now. Like, like, this is such a far cry from where we were. It's like, I wish that there were more episodes like this, but there's only one more.
Which is why we got to savor it.
I know. I really want to know what happens, but I get the distinct feeling that it's just going to be disappointing. Not because it's, like, not going to be good, but just because I'm at the point now where I do want to see more, and there's only one episode left.
And it's not going to do enough for you?
Well, I don't think it's going to do enough. I think there's way too many questions that have been asked and directions that they've gone to have any sort of satisfying conclusion.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's valid.
Pretty open world that they've created. Like, this is one of those you paint yourself into a different kind of corner, which is there are too many directions to go, so none of them are going to seem satisfying.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I've come around on this immensely, so thank you, Emma.
I'm glad. I think it's these last 2 episodes that made me want to share this more than anything. If not for these 2 episodes, I think I still would have shown you, only for the fact of this is internet history. But
right.
I think like this is what made me want to put it high up on the list.
That's fair, which I totally get. So what are your final thoughts, Dustin?
I don't really know, but I mean, that's said a lot after we watch these, but I'm kind of sold on the fact that there's some family trauma, maybe, or you see, like we mentioned before, I'm sold on that area of things, but I still try to search for connections from episode to episode.
I get why people like it, for sure. But I think maybe the best thing about this is that it is kind of standalone. You can just watch them out of order.
Yeah.
Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. There gets a point where you can't watch them out of order.
Exactly.
You have to keep watching them chronologically, which is why I keep asking this whole like chronological thing. Because if this is its own standalone every episode, that makes this infinitely more watchable than Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Unless we're talking like the early stuff. But like every episode of this has been more or less self-contained, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, a huge plus, or, check in the pro column for this show. Because again, like, you can watch a 4-minute episode and get about as much salad fingers as you would in a 15-minute episode.
I would agree. So,
yeah.
I mean,
so we got one left.
It's really hard to draw a conclusion without the final installment. So,
right.
I'm excited to see what you think of it once it comes to a close, whether or not you think it is disappointing, only for the sake of, was it able to do enough? Was it able to neatly tie some semblance of a bow, or just leave you with more questions than you came in with? Because I think for a series like this, if the last episode makes you question things even more than you already were, which is a lot, I don't know if that does it justice. I feel like that's more frustrating than anything, because it feels like, like, what was I on the journey for?
Right. Which, and again, like for me, I have been on this journey now. It feels like more to just experience a show that I have heard about but never watched. Like I've been saying, like my expectations, I feel like, are very different now than what they used to be with this show. I'm now just enjoying it for what it is, not trying to find some sort of like overarching story or something. Because even if they are doing it, they're not doing it in a way that it's like intrusive to everything else. And everything else is still pretty interesting and entertaining and unique. So, it's singularly salad fingers, and that's, a good and bad thing depending on how you look at it.
It is very unique and yet so reminiscent of its time.
Yeah.
And
it does feel weird that it's like around in 2022.
Something like this being created recently, it feels very strange. I would agree.
Yeah. It's like a holdover of a time past where people were really, like, this was mainstream. Like, this is not mainstream anymore, like in any remote context. So it's interesting. I'm excited to see where the final episode goes. I don't have any preconceived notions of what we're going to get out of it, but it is titled Post-Man, like after man.
Mhm.
So who knows? I'm excited to see where this ends up, and I'm excited to see where we go after Salad Fingers, because there's more things on the internet than just "Don't hug me, I'm scared" and Salad Fingers. So shocking, I know. So until the next time you hear the three of us doing a SurrealTube together, you can find us over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show is downloadable on all platforms. Wherever you get podcasts, you can find this show. Like, rate, and review the show wherever you get it. Big thanks, as always, to Alex Malnack, Dustin Rutledge, who's here, and Maggie the Odd for all the things that they do behind the scenes to help the show keep running, which is, the music and the album artwork. So big thanks to the three of them. Thanks to Emma for programming this series. As always, Dustin for joining us. And I think, big thanks as always to our good friend, the former host of Sightings, Mr. Tim White.
No mystery is closed to an open mind.